There is something that happens when you watch Steven Universe long enough. The show starts giving you things quietly. Not announced, not underlined, just placed there in the corner of a frame or tucked inside a lyric or buried in a background detail that the camera barely lingers on. And eventually, you realize that nothing in this show is accidental. That the people making it were placing things deliberately, carefully, with the kind of precision that comes from caring enormously about what you are building and trusting your audience enough to meet you there. Fusion is the fullest expression of that care. Every fusion in Steven Universe is designed to mean something. The appearance, the weapon, the personality, the reason for existing in the first place. Every single fusion is a conversation between its components. Made visible, given form, given a name, they do not just happen. They are not simply power boosts or convenient plot solutions or an excuse to draw a bigger character with more arms. Every fusion in this show is a question and an answer at the same time. What happens when these two people trust each other completely? What does love or friendship or even hatred look like when it takes physical form and learns to walk? Tonight, we are going through every single one of them. Every fusion that this show gave us, in every form, from the briefest appearance to the ones who became the emotional backbone of 5 seasons and a film and a short follow-up series, we are ranking them by power. But power in this show is not a simple thing to measure, and that makes this more interesting than a straightforward list. Because a fusion in Steven Universe can be enormously destructive and still be weaker than one that is perfectly stable. Because the show is quite careful to make the point that raw size and raw strength are not the same as actual effectiveness. And because some fusions change the game entirely by introducing abilities that were never part of either component on their own. So, settle in, get comfortable, let the night get quiet around you. We are going to work through every fusion this show ever gave us, from the ones at the bottom who barely held themselves together, all the way up to a mountain of obsidian lava that climbed the exterior of a building the size of a small city to save everyone it loved. Every fusion, ranked by power. Starting from the bottom, if you are watching this at 2 in the morning with your headphones in and the light low, or maybe in the middle of the afternoon with nowhere else to be, drop your location and the time in the comments right now. I want to know where this is finding you tonight. And while you are down there, please subscribe if you have not yet. It genuinely helps, and there is a great deal more of this kind of thing coming your way. Now, let us actually begin. The philosophy of fusion. Before we start sorting fusions into any kind of order, we need to understand what fusion actually is in this universe. Because without that foundation, a ranking based purely on raw power misses the entire point of what the show is doing with these characters. Fusion in Steven Universe is not simply a combat technique. It is not what the homeworld Gem civilization was told it was, which was a tactical resource reserved for soldiers of the same type who needed extra firepower to complete a mission. That was the official story. That was the version of fusion that existed in the manuals and the training programs and the carved stone ideology of an empire that had been running on the same assumptions for longer than human civilization had existed. Gems of the same type fuse for strength in battle. That is the rule. That is the limit. Everything else is aberration. What fusion actually is, according to the show's most fundamental and sustained argument, is relationship made physical. When two gems fuse, they become something that is not either of them individually. It is not one of them in charge with the other one riding along. It is not a shared body with a rotating pilot seat. It is a genuinely new entity with its own personality, its own voice, its own perspective on the world, that exists because of the specific nature of the connection between its components. Two gems who barely know each other can fuse in a combat emergency, and what they produce reflects that emptiness. It is functional, maybe powerful, but hollow. There is no there there. There is strength and size and weapons, but there is no person. Just force. Two gems who have spent thousands of years in each other's company, who have held each other through grief and joy and the long, slow grinding work of protecting a planet they love, who have become as close as two beings can be without literally being one being. Those two gems can fuse and produce something that the universe has never quite seen before. They produce something that feels like a person who already knows exactly who they are, because the relationship that made them was built over millennia of choosing each other every single day. Rebecca Sugar said in an interview that fusion was the show's way of visualizing the way we become different people in different relationships. That a person is not exactly the same with their best friend as they are with their parent, not exactly the same at work as they are at home, not exactly the same in love as they are alone. And that this shifting, this becoming someone slightly different in the presence of someone who knows you, is not instability. It is intimacy. It is what genuine connection does to identity. The person who shows up when you are around the people who truly matter to you, that may actually be the most real version of you. The show explores this at every level. It uses fusion to talk about romantic love, as it does with Garnet, who is the embodiment of Ruby and Sapphire's love made tangible and permanent, and capable of leading a team of ancient magical warriors for 5,000 years. It uses fusion to talk about friendship, as it does with Smoky Quartz, who is what Steven and Amethyst produce when they stop comparing themselves to some imagined standard, and simply show up in the same space with the same willingness to try. It uses fusion to talk about the parent and child bond, as both Steg and Rainbow Quartz 2 make beautifully clear. And it uses fusion to talk about the way trauma and hatred can bind two people together just as powerfully as love can, even if what they produce is something that hurts everyone it touches, including themselves. Malachite is not a subtle metaphor. She is direct. She is the show saying clearly, this is what happens when you stay fused with something that is hurting you because you are afraid of what happens if you let go. The power you get from it is real, and it is not yours, and it will eventually consume you. This is why ranking fusions by power requires more than looking at who is the biggest. Size matters, obviously. The show is explicit that more gems in a fusion generally means more raw physical power. A 5-gem fusion will, in almost every circumstance, be physically larger and more destructive than a 2-gem fusion, assuming roughly comparable gem types. But stability matters enormously. A fusion that is 10 times larger than its opponent, but cannot maintain coherent thought because its components are at war inside. It is not more powerful than a smaller fusion, whose components are in such deep harmony that they anticipate each other, move as one, and hold together under conditions that would shatter anything less secure. There is also the matter of unique abilities. Some fusions develop powers that were not present in either of their components individually. Garnet's electrokinesis is Ruby's fire, and Sapphire's ice combining into a third thing that is neither. Obsidian's lava generation works the same way. These emergent abilities are not simply the sum of the components. They are what happens in the space between the components. They are what the relationship generates that neither person could generate alone. One final note before we begin. The show distinguishes between fusions formed from genuine connection and fusions forced against the will of their components. The forced fusions, the cluster gems, millions of gem shards pushed into each other by homeworld scientists, exist outside this ranking entirely. They are not fusions in any meaningful sense. They are weapons made out of people. Their power is immense and horrifying, and the show treats them with the gravity that deserves. But they are not characters. They are a tragedy, and ranking them would be the same kind of reduction that Homeworld performed on them in the first place. With that said, let us start at the very bottom. The background fusions: Watermelon Tourmaline, Lemon Jade, and What They Tell Us. There is a whole tier of fusions in this show that never got the spotlight, never got a dedicated episode, never became the focus of a major arc. They exist at the edges of the story, doing meaningful work in the margins, and they represent something the show is trying to say even in its quietest moments. Fusion is not rare. It is not exceptional. It happens constantly in all kinds of configurations for all kinds of reasons, and the crystal gems are not the only ones doing it. Watermelon Tourmaline is 2 unknown tourmaline gems fused together. They appear briefly in the series, about as well defined as their screen time suggests, which is to say, almost not at all. The show gives them a name in the credits and a visual presence that is briefly memorable and then moves on to the larger story happening around them. Same gem fusions, as the show makes clear, produce larger and stronger versions of the gems in question. 2 tourmalines fused are more powerful than 1 tourmaline alone. That is essentially all we know. But here is why they matter even at the bottom of this ranking. Their existence tells you that fusion is a fact of gem life across the entire civilization, not something that requires the extraordinary emotional circumstances the crystal gems seem to need for it to happen. On Homeworld, same-type gems fuse routinely for combat purposes. It is approved. It is ordinary. Two tourmaline soldiers in a difficult situation fuse to create something twice as capable and considerably more dangerous, and then they unfuse when the situation is resolved, and no one writes a song about it. It is just what gems do when the numbers require it. This is the context into which the crystal gem's more expressive, more emotionally complex, more politically scandalous fusions land. They are using the ordinary mechanism of their biology to express things that their biology was never supposed to be allowed to express. Which is the specific kind of rebellion that Steven Universe is most interested in across its entire run. Lemon Jade sits alongside Watermelon Tourmaline at the bottom. Two different Jades fuse together, appearing at the Era 3 ball in the episode Together Alone. She dances. She is there when the chaos breaks out after Stevonnie forms in the middle of the court function, and everything falls apart. She is diffused by Yellow Diamond without what appears to be significant effort. That is nearly everything we know about her. What her place here acknowledges is that she demonstrates no combat ability, exists in a single scene, and represents the same point Watermelon Tourmaline makes. Fusion is everywhere and between all kinds of gems, not confined to the main characters and their most significant relationships. Lemon Jade dancing at a court ball is, if you look at it with the right angle, the world beginning to change. A mixed fusion at a formal court event, not hiding, not being shattered, just dancing. The world is shifting, slowly, in ways the rest of the story has to catch up to. The Ruby Fusions. Numbers without wisdom. The Ruby Squad deserves their own section because they represent something specific in the power structure, and because the way the show handles them says something interesting about what fusion is for when love and connection are not the foundation. Rubies are individually among the least powerful gems the show clearly assesses. They are small, they are aggressive, they have a single gauntlet as a weapon. They are profoundly susceptible to distraction, and their strategic intelligence is roughly equivalent to a very enthusiastic and loyal golden retriever. They are brave. They feel things intensely and immediately, and without any of the filtering that a more cautious gem might apply. But they are common soldiers, mass-produced and deployed in numbers because numbers are what they offer. The Ruby Squad arrives in Season 3. 5 rubies sent by Yellow Diamond to retrieve Jasper. Steven nicknames them Leggy, Navy, Army, Doc, and Eyeball. They are immediately endearing in the way that the show tends to make its nominal antagonists endearing, not because they are competent, but because they are clearly trying. They communicate by bumping into each other. They fuse and unfuse casually in situations that more strategic beings would approach differently. They are not very good at the mission, and they are, against all observable evidence, excellent at being a small, strange family. The triple ruby fusion is noticeably larger and more physically formidable than any individual ruby. Real increases in size, real increases in strength. The personality does not become more sophisticated in proportion, however. 3 rubies together are 3 times as impulsive and roughly 3 times as likely to make a choice that seemed right in the moment and becomes obviously wrong approximately 4 seconds later. The quintuple ruby fusion, all 5 squad members combined into a single enormous ruby-shaped powerhouse, is the most formidable version of this particular equation. She is large enough to be visually impressive. She is strong enough to be a credible threat. The show presents her as something that requires a specific response, and the response it selects is Sardonyx, who deals with her efficiently and with one well-placed blow. 5 rubies fused are not a match for 2 gems of significantly higher individual power who are in genuine harmony. What keeps the ruby fusions near the bottom of this list, despite their numerical advantage, is a fundamental architectural limitation. Ruby's personality across all 5 of the squad members trends toward passion and impulse and direct physical force. There is no future vision from a Sapphire component. There is no tactical intelligence from a Pearl. There is no flexibility of approach from a more varied combination. 5 rubies fused together produce a being that is 5 times as strong and 5 times as impulsive. And impulsive strength is among the easier things to deal with if you can think faster than it can move. The ruby fusions rank above the background fusions because we have seen them in actual combat and they have demonstrated real ability. They rank below everything else because their ceiling is not very high and because the ruby personality, however wonderful it is in the show's emotional register, is not built for the kind of sustained strategic engagement where their raw numbers might actually compensate for everything they lack. Rhodonite. Survival as its own kind of power. Rhodonite occupies a specific place in this ranking that requires some care to describe accurately because the distance between her emotional significance and her combat effectiveness is part of what makes her so interesting to think about. She is an off-color fusion, a ruby and a pearl, two gem types that are explicitly not supposed to combine. On Homeworld, her existence is not merely unusual, it is illegal. Mixed-type fusion disrupts the hierarchy. It suggests that the categories are permeable, that a ruby and a pearl can become something that is neither, and if the categories are permeable, then the entire system built on those categories looks less permanent than the diamonds need it to look. Rhodonite has been hiding underground in abandoned tunnels for what the show implies is a very long time, living alongside Fluorite and the Rutile twins and Padparadscha and eventually Lars. They are a small community of the rejected and the defective, and the ones who did not fit, and they have built something like a life in the places the Homeworld system has no use for. Rhodonite is anxious in a way that goes deeper than personality quirk into something that looks quite a lot like what sustained fear does over years and decades and longer. She startles at things that turn out to be nothing. She catastrophizes reliably. She has been in survival mode for so long that everything in the world has taken on the texture of a potential threat, because the world she was made for actually was one. She is primarily rose pink with dark veins running through her, because rhodonite in real life is exactly that, a pink mineral with black or dark brown veins of manganese oxide. She has 4 arms and 4 eyes. She keeps her extra arms held close to her body in the way of someone who has spent years trying to take up as little space as possible. In a fight, Rhodonite is competent. She is not a powerhouse. She does not have Garnet's future vision or Sugalite's raw size. She is a 2-gem fusion whose components are both relatively low in the Homeworld hierarchy, who has spent years hiding rather than training, and whose emotional state makes sustained, confident action genuinely difficult. In the Season 5 Homeworld sequences, when she needs to fight, she fights and she holds her own. But she is not a weapon. She is something more interesting and more fragile than that. What she is, though the show does not underline it, is a miracle. In a civilization that would destroy her for existing, she found someone and chose to stay fused with them. For years. For long enough that the other off-colors treat her presence with easy familiarity, the familiarity of a shared life rather than a shared emergency. Rhodonite is powerful in the way that continuing to exist as yourself when everything around you insists you should not is powerful. That kind of power does not translate into a combat ranking, but it is worth naming before we move on. In the rankings, she sits above the ruby fusions because a ruby and pearl combination produces more tactical versatility than 5 gems of the same impulsive type. She sits below almost everyone else because versatility and training and size all exist elsewhere in greater abundance. Stevonnie, the first fusion between a human and a gem. Stevonnie is the answer to a question nobody knew the show was asking until the moment the question was answered. The question is, what happens when a gem and a human fuse? The answer the Homeworld civilization would give, if asked, is that this is impossible. Humans are organic life, a category that gems are designed to view as secondary at best. The entire colonization program that the show's backstory is built around treats organic life as something to be removed, planets drained of the nutrients that sustain biology to feed the kindergartens that produce new gems. The idea that a human and a gem could fuse is not just aberrant from a Homeworld perspective, it is conceptually incoherent. You cannot achieve the necessary harmony with something that does not share your fundamental nature. There is no mechanism. And then Steven and Connie dance together in a kitchen on a quiet afternoon, and Stevonnie steps into the world and changes everything. They appear first in the Season 1 episode, Alone Together, and the episode knows exactly how significant this moment is and refuses to make it dramatic. It is intimate instead. Steven and Connie are practicing dancing in a space that is slightly too small for dancing, and something shifts in the way things shift when 2 people are paying total attention to each other, and the attention becomes its own kind of gravity, and then they are fused. They stand in the kitchen, taller than either of them, wearing clothing that is a combination of both of theirs. Looking like someone that neither of them exactly is, but that both of them immediately recognize as real. Garnet's reaction is one of the most emotionally rich moments in the first season. She begins to cry, not from distress or shock, but from a specific joy that only makes sense once you understand her. She has spent 5,000 years as a living argument that fusion is more than what Homeworld says it is. And here is Steven, who she loves as much as she is capable of loving anyone, producing the same proof with a different friend. She tells them, and this line is important enough to sit with, "You are not one person and you are not two people. You are an experience." Stevani's purpose in the show is multiple and layered. They are the show's exploration of adolescence, the strange, uncomfortable experience of suddenly existing in a body that the world responds to differently, of people looking at you in ways you were not prepared for, and making assumptions about who you are based on what you look like. In their episodes, they navigate attention they did not ask for, learn to say no to things that feel wrong, discover the difference between being seen positively and being seen in ways that have something else underneath them. They are explicitly non-binary, referred to with they and them pronouns, and the show never makes this a discussion point or an explanation. It is simply who they are. In terms of combat power, Stevani is genuinely formidable for what they are. They carry Steven's gem abilities, the shield, the healing tears, the protective bubble, the dream-walking ability that Steven develops across the show's run. They carry Connie's fighting ability, which by the time of Steven Universe Future has become seriously impressive, the product of years of Pearl's training that transformed a girl who read books about sword fighting into someone who could hold her own against opponents who should, on paper, be out of her league. Stevani can summon 2 shields simultaneously. The show depicts this before Steven can do it on his own, which is one of those small details that the attentive viewer notices and catalogs and thinks about later. The fusion unlocks possibilities in both of them that are not individually available. In Jungle Moon, Stevani dreamwalks into a memory from Yellow Diamond's past, which is a form of access that only makes sense if Stevani's combination of human and gem consciousness creates something capable of moving between different kinds of awareness in ways that neither Steven nor Connie can manage. Alone, what keeps Stevani relatively modest in the power ranking is the human element. 3/4 human, 1/4 gem. By the show's rough geometry, Connie does not have a gem. She does not have regeneration. If Stevani takes enough damage, there is a human body in that equation that heals in human time rather than gem time. Connie's contribution in terms of skill and emotional intelligence is enormous and irreplaceable, but it does not add raw gem power in the way that a second gem component would. Stevani sits in the lower middle range, above the Ruby fusions and the background fusions because they are stable, capable, and carry genuine combat ability that has been tested in actual conflict. Below the full gem fusions because the human component imposes limits that love cannot entirely overcome. Steg, the father and son who radiate support like a force of nature. Steven Universe. The movie gave us Spinel, who is extraordinary, and it gave us Steg, who is extraordinary in a completely different register. Steg is the fusion of Steven and his father Greg Universe. Greg is a human man. He drives a van. He plays guitar. He is, by any conventional measure, the least powerful person Steven knows in terms of raw capability, and also one of the most important people in the show in terms of what he represents and what he contributes to the people around him. He is the parent who showed up, who learned from his mistakes with rose quartz, who never stopped trying to be present in a life that kept exceeding his ability to fully understand it. He is the person who, in the middle of some of the show's most intense crises, sat with Steven and was simply there, and was not embarrassed by simply being there, and never felt that simply being there was insufficient. When Steven and Greg fuse into Steg, what emerges is a large, impossibly composed man with 4 arms and a double-necked electric guitar, and the general bearing of someone who has never in his life encountered anything worth rushing toward. He drifts down from the sky during the movie's musical climax as if he has all the time in the world. He carries himself with the easy confidence of a being who knows exactly what he is here to do and has no doubt about his ability to do it. His weapon is the double-necked guitar, formed from the combination of Steven's gem guitar and Greg's guitar. The show confirms this is technically a summoned fusion weapon, composed partly of external objects rather than purely of gem material, which puts Steg in interesting technical company and raises interesting questions about what the weapon is capable of that go entirely unanswered because Steg never fights anyone. He plays. That is what he does with the weapon. He plays music at a moment when Pearl and Amethyst have been struck by Spinel's Rejuvenator and reduced to their most basic functions, unable to remember who they are or who they love. And what comes out of Steg is the combined music of a father who never stopped playing and a son who grew up loving music because his father loved it, and it reaches Pearl and Amethyst in a place that cannot be reached by force. The show's creative team describes Steg as the personification of the support Greg gives Steven, made visible at full scale. They said he is in a perfect position to radiate grounding and confidence for others, to remind people of themselves when they cannot remember. This is not a combat description. It is a description of a particular and powerful kind of love, the love that stays calm when everything is falling apart, because the calm is what is needed most. What keeps Steg modest in the combat portion of this ranking is straightforward. He has never demonstrated combat ability. Physical strength? Yes. Agility? Yes. Some form of levitation or flight that appears connected to both his gem heritage and his musical output? Yes. But whether he carries Steven's shield, whether he has any derivative of Garnet's future vision through Steven's relationship with Garnet, whether there is anything approaching a combat ceiling to explore, the show leaves entirely open. What Steg has demonstrated is that he can reach people who cannot be reached by any other means. And in the specific universe of Steven Universe, where the most important fights are almost always the ones that end in conversation rather than defeat, that might be the most significant power in the show. The ranking cannot fully account for it, but it would be wrong not to mention it. Steg sits above Stevonnie in this ranking primarily because his demonstrated stability is remarkable, because the nature of his fusion suggests a grounded calm that would hold under significant stress, and because Steven's pink diamond inheritance, combined with Greg's profound emotional groundedness, is a combination that could produce something larger in combat than the one brief scene we have suggests. Sunstone and Rainbow Quartz 2, what Steven adds to each crystal gem. The Season 5 finale and the subsequent movie gave us something the show had been building toward since Stevonnie first appeared. Multiple fusions between Steven and the crystal gems individually, each one a different answer to the question of what Steven's unique half-human, half-gem nature produces when combined with a specific member of his found family. Sunstone is what Steven plus Garnet looks like. Garnet is herself already a fusion, Ruby and Sapphire permanently combined, producing a being whose stability has been proven over more than 5,000 years. When Steven enters that already complex equation, the result is Sunstone, voiced by Shaniqua Shandai. With the energy of someone who had an enormous amount of fun with the 1990s public service announcement aesthetic, the creative team chose as the character's touchstone. Sunstone is enthusiastic in a way that implies multiple exclamation points in every sentence. They are safety conscious to a degree that reads as almost comic until you remember that one of their components can literally see probable futures and therefore has genuine, evidence-based reasons to take safety seriously. Their weapon is a pair of suction cups formed from Steven's shield and Garnet's gauntlets, which is either the most absurd weapon in the entire show or the most logical depending on your perspective. The suction cups allow Sunstone to adhere to surfaces in ways that change the geometry of a fight, to approach from angles that a ground-bound opponent cannot easily anticipate. What Sunstone carries from Garnet is everything Garnet brings to any engagement: future vision, electrokinesis, the physical strength of Ruby and Sapphire combined, the speed that comes from Sapphire's grace and Ruby's explosive force working together, 5,000 years of combat experience, a strategic intelligence that can process probable futures and act on them in real time, plus Steven's shield and his healing potential, and the particular emotional quality he adds to every fusion he participates in: warmth, connection, the capacity for love that is not abstract but immediate and specific. The ceiling on Sunstone is genuinely high. What limits it within the power ranking is the same thing that limits all of Steven's fusions. Steven is not a full gem. His contribution is enormous and irreplaceable, but it is not the same as adding another full gem would be. The human element limits the ceiling even when the human in question carries Pink Diamond's inheritance. Sunstone also represents something structurally unusual, a fusion where one component is itself already a fusion. Garnet does not disaggregate when she becomes Sunstone. Ruby and Sapphire are still Ruby and Sapphire inside Garnet inside Sunstone, which raises questions about layered consciousness and access to ability that the show does not directly address, but that are genuinely interesting to sit with. Rainbow Quartz 2 is Steven plus Pearl. The original Rainbow Quartz was the fusion of rose quartz and pearl, seen briefly in the Season 2 flashback We Need to Talk. She was elegant and slightly unkind. Pearl's demonstration to Greg that she and Rose had something Greg could not touch. She danced. She made her point. Then she defused and the show moved on. And Rainbow Quartz existed in memory and implication for several seasons. Rainbow Quartz 2 is a genuinely different entity in a genuinely different context. She appears in the Season 5 finale, formed in a moment of actual need, and what emerges is someone who seems to arrive fully knowing who they are, which is the most Pearl thing possible and also the most Steven thing possible. The design is frequently and correctly compared to Mary Poppins. They are tall and elegant, carrying a parasol formed from Pearl's spear and Steven's shield, and they move with the kind of composed grace that suggests they have never experienced a moment of genuine inconvenience. They float, they leave a rainbow trail. They speak with an English accent. They are warm and capable and slightly theatrical, which manages to be deeply both of their components at once. Their weapon is the parasol, and it is not as limited as it looks. When open, it functions as a shield, the Steven shield that forms its canopy, providing genuine protective ability. When closed, it strikes, Pearl's spear providing the handle and the force. It can be ridden, leaving a rainbow trail through the air. It can animate inanimate objects by touch, which is a unique emergent ability that does not obviously derive from either component and suggests the combination is producing something new. Rainbow Quartz 2 and Sunstone sit near each other in the ranking, operating from different emphases. Sunstone is raw power and future vision. Rainbow Quartz 2 is precision and creative problem-solving. Neither is definitively superior. They are different tools for different situations. Both of them sit above the more basic two-gem fusions because Steven adds a dimension that a second straight gem simply does not. Opal, the fragile giant. Opal is the first fusion that the audience gets to properly meet and understand. She appears in Giant Woman, a Season 1 episode that names itself after what it is about, Steven desperately wanting to see Pearl and Amethyst fuse into something enormous and wonderful. The episode's central joke, gentle and earned, is that Pearl and Amethyst almost never fuse. Not because they cannot, but because they cannot maintain the harmony long enough for it to be worth trying most of the time. Pearl is ordered and precise and committed to doing things the correct way because she has spent millennia developing the discipline required to be something other than what she was made to be. Amethyst is loose and improvised and committed to doing things whatever way feels right in the moment because she has spent her entire existence on Earth finding her own way without anyone to model it for her. They love each other. They are genuinely fond of each other, in the complicated way that people who have shared a household and a mission for thousands of years develop genuine, inescapable fondness alongside everything else. But they do not harmonize easily. Opal exists in the spaces between their frictions. She is tall in a way that is difficult to fully appreciate until you see her standing next to something you have calibrated. Her proportions are long and willowy in a way that suggests Pearl's aesthetics while incorporating something of Amethyst's stockier strength, producing a figure that is simultaneously elegant and capable of force. Her hair is long and white and wild. She has 4 arms and 4 eyes, wide and slightly dreamy, giving her expressions a permanently somewhere-else quality that suits her exactly. Her personality, when it surfaces, is serene to a degree that functions as its own particular flavor of impracticality. Not calm in the way that Garnet is calm, which is a product of deep self-knowledge and deliberate groundedness. Calm in the way that a river is calm, moving steadily in a direction it has decided on and not particularly aware of what the river was supposed to be doing instead of thence. She will stop mid-mission because a bird is beautiful, because the light on a cliff face does something extraordinary, because the view from somewhere she was not supposed to linger is too remarkable to leave without acknowledgement. This is both Pearl's capacity for wonder at beautiful things and Amethyst's complete commitment to following whatever feels compelling right now, merged into someone who is fully present in every moment and rather bad at remembering what the current objective is. Her weapon is a recurve bow, an energy weapon formed by combining Pearl's spear with Amethyst's whip. The spear is the stave, the whip is the string. What she fires are arrows of concentrated energy that travel at speed and hit with force that scales with the distance involved. In Giant Woman, she fires across the interior of a temple and hits moving targets cleanly. In The Return, she fires at a homeworld warship and the arrows reach it. They do not stop it, but they reach it, which tells you something about the range and power of what she can deploy. The most significant combat demonstration Opal receives is in Super Watermelon Island, where she is part of Alexandrite and the final blow that defeats Malachite. After Alexandrite has been fighting Malachite for an extended period, throwing everything she has at a target that refuses to go down, it is Opal's bow, that precise, long-ranged arrow, that ends the fight. This is not a statement about relative power. Sujilite's flail and Sardonyx's warhammer and all the punches and kicks that Alexandrite deployed before this moment did not end it. The precise range shot from a precision specialist lands when brute force has been exhausted. This is one of the show's most efficient demonstrations of what different abilities are actually for. What keeps Opal below the mid-tier fusions despite this demonstration is the stability problem. Pearl and Amethyst's relationship, for most of the show's run, is uneven in ways that make Opal's continued existence under stress difficult to sustain. She defuses the moment her components find something genuine to disagree about. And Pearl and Amethyst will always eventually find something, because they are different people who have been shaped by genuinely different experiences and genuinely different relationships to who they are supposed to be. The movie changes something. By the time Opal appears in Steven Universe, the movie, singing a duet with Steg while the two of them float above the action on their respective instruments, it feels like a statement about arrival. The relationship that produces her has done the work. The fusion holds together without strain. The same beautiful four-armed archer who used to drift away from her objectives to look at birds is now composed and present and fully here. She just needed the relationship underneath her to become something that could hold her up. Opal sits in the upper middle range. Her power ceiling, when fully focused and stable, may exceed some of what sits above her in this list. But the history of instability is real, and it matters for where a fusion actually lands in practice versus where they could theoretically land under ideal conditions. Sardonyx and Smoky Quartz. When knowing yourself is its own weapon, there is a tier of fusions whose claim to power is not primarily destructive capability but something that requires a little more thought to name. Call it self-knowledge, call it clarity. Call it the specific advantage that comes from a fusion who arrives already knowing exactly who she is and what she is here to do. Sardonyx is the fusion of Garnet and Pearl. She first appears in the Season 2 arc the show advertised as the Week of Sardonyx, which is built around something genuinely painful to watch unfold. Pearl has been tricking Garnet into fusing with her under false pretenses. She is rebuilding a communication tower repeatedly, so she has a reason to ask Garnet to fuse, to become Sardonyx, to exist as Sardonyx for a while. Not because the tower needs rebuilding. Because being Sardonyx is the only time Pearl feels as powerful and as certain and as worthy as she spends most of her existence not feeling. Being Sardonyx is how Pearl manages to believe, temporarily, that she is enough. This is a form of dependency that the show treats with the weight it deserves. It is not just that Pearl is being dishonest with Garnet, though she is. It is that she is using fusion as an emotional crutch in a way that violates the most fundamental thing Garnet believes about herself. Because Garnet's belief in fusion as sacred is inseparable from the fact that she exists because two gems chose each other in defiance of everything, and what Pearl is doing is treating that sacredness as a resource to be used for personal comfort. When Garnet finds out, her response is silence. The kind of silence that says, "You knew what this meant to me and you did it anyway." The arc eventually resolves through honesty and apology and a difficult conversation, and Pearl and Garnet find their way back to each other. But the resolution is earned rather than given, and the damage is real before the repair begins. Sardonyx herself is one of the most theatrically vibrant characters in the entire show. She is tall and long-limbed with heeled boots and 4 arms and 2 sets of eyes, and she holds herself with the casual certainty of someone who has thought carefully about how she looks from every angle and arrived at a deeply satisfying conclusion. Her voice is warm and slightly elevated, the voice of someone who is charmed by you specifically and would like you to know that she considers your presence a gift while also making it clear that she considers most things gifts and you should feel appropriately special. Her weapon is a warhammer, This sounds blunt until you see her use it. The handle is flexible, designed to absorb impact and redirect force with a precision that her size would not lead you to expect. She can spin it into a drill mode. She deals with the quintuple ruby fusion with a single, correctly applied blow in drill form. 5 gems fused, taken apart by one hit, precisely placed by someone who could see exactly where to put it. What makes Sardonyx particularly formidable in an analytic sense is what she inherits from Garnet. Future vision, combined with Pearl's extraordinary tactical intelligence, produces a fusion who is not just strong but genuinely difficult to get an advantage on. She can see where you are likely to go before you go there. She can see the gaps in her own approach before you find them. She is running strategy faster than most opponents can react, using future vision to select among options that Pearl's precision then executes with the force that Garnet's strength supplies. The weakness is in the relationship. Pearl and Garnet's bond has tensions in it that are not fully resolved for most of the show's run. When the components' relationship is strained, Sardonyx cannot sustain herself. Her ceiling is very high, and her floor, when the relationship below her is damaged, is much lower. That gap matters in the ranking even as the ceiling draws you upward. Smoky Quartz is the fusion of Steven and Amethyst, and they are worth dwelling on because they are one of the show's most emotionally honest characters. They appear first in Earthlings, Season 3, formed in a moment that is not strategic or planned or even fully conscious. Amethyst has just been defeated by Jasper in a way that crystallizes everything she has ever believed was wrong with her. She came out too small, she emerged too late, she will never be what a quartz is supposed to be. She is lying in the dirt of the beta kindergarten, and the future is not looking like something she wants to face. And Steven looks at someone he loves being convinced that she is a failure, and he is constitutionally incapable of standing still for that. He reaches for her, not to fix anything, to be in it with her. And Smoky Quartz arrives in a mushroom cloud of smoke from the desert floor. Their weapon is a yo-yo, enormous and crystalline. Steven's shield plus Amethyst's whip equals something that should not work as a weapon and is somehow exactly right. They are stocky and 3-armed, an extra forearm extending from one elbow in a way that is specific to them. They carry themselves with the ease of someone who has decided to enjoy whatever is happening, which, given what is happening when they form, is a meaningful choice. Their personality is Amethyst's self-deprecating humor combined with Steven's warmth, producing someone who makes jokes about their own shortcomings preemptively, getting out in front of the criticism before anyone else can land it. In Know Your Fusion, when Sardonyx runs them through tests to identify their unique abilities, Smoky fails every test and spirals. 0 + 0 = 0. 2 wrongs don't make a right, and I guess I'm living proof that's true. I'm one big, super wrong, good-for-nothing dud with a yo-yo. And then Sardonyx diffuses and the room begins to collapse, and Smoky acts. Without hesitation. Without waiting to feel ready, they swing the yo-yo across a collapsing room and haul Garnet and Pearl to safety before the whole thing comes apart. They do not succeed because they passed any test. They succeed because when something needed doing, they moved. The yo-yo is more capable than discussions of Smoky's power typically acknowledge. Multiple yo-yos can be deployed simultaneously, up to 3 at once. At speed, they generate significant wind force, a form of aerokinesis that the show specifically classifies as a unique ability Smoky has. They can grapple, entangle, strike, create cover, and swing between platforms in ways that change the geometry of a fight. In Earthlings, Smoky holds their own against Jasper, a being who had just defeated Amethyst and who is among the most capable fighters on the planet. They do not decisively win, but they hold, and they hold with a yo-yo, while both of their components are in the worst moments of their respective emotional lives. Smoky and Sardonyx sit near each other in the rankings, with Sardonyx holding a slight edge in direct combat effectiveness through the future vision. But Smoky's stability is worth noting explicitly. When they exist, they are not at war with themselves. Their insecurities amplify together, which is its own kind of challenge, but the core of who they are is not in conflict. Both Steven and Amethyst are, at their foundation, beings who keep getting up. Smoky keeps getting up. That matters more, over the course of a sustained fight, than a weapon that looks more impressive on paper. Garnet, the proof of love made permanent. Here is the truth about Garnet stated plainly before anything else. She is the most important fusion in the show. Not the most powerful, though she is formidable. The most important, the most central. The one whose existence changes everything around her and whose meaning resonates outward through the entire run. Garnet is a fusion that began as an accident nearly 6,000 years before the show's events. During the very early days of the Crystal Gem Rebellion on Earth, Blue Diamond's court came to assess the situation on the planet. Among the members of that court was Sapphire, an aristocratic gem with the rare ability of future vision, a composed oracle whose function was to advise Blue Diamond on probable outcomes. Among the soldiers assigned to protect Sapphire was a Ruby, small, passionate, assigned to keep Sapphire safe, and entirely committed to this job. Sapphire had a vision. She saw the crystal gems attack. She saw herself get poofed in the fray. She saw that the outcome was acceptable within the parameters of the mission. She reported this. The prophecy was filed, and then things did not go according to the prophecy. The Ruby threw herself in front of Pearl's sword to protect Sapphire. And in the moment of contact, they fused. Neither of them intended it. The entire court froze, because what they were witnessing was something that was not supposed to be able to exist. Garnet formed for the first time, confused and stumbling on a cloud arena, not knowing what she was or what to do with herself. Blue Diamond sentenced the Ruby to be shattered for fusing with a member of court, and Sapphire, who had spent her whole carefully structured existence following the rules of a system she had never questioned, grabbed Ruby by the hand and jumped off the edge of the arena. She chose to protect someone she had known for approximately 90 seconds over everything she had been before that moment. They found each other in a cave in the rain. They talked about what had happened and what they had felt when they were fused. They fused again, by choice this time. And that is the choice that has been continuously made every moment since, for more than 5,000 years. Rose Quartz found them shortly after, and Rose told them that what they were was the answer, not a crime against the social order, an answer to the question the crystal gems were trying to ask about what freedom actually looks like. Garnet has been fused, with very few and very significant exceptions, ever since. That duration changes a fusion. Garnet does not experience herself as two gems sharing a body. She experiences herself as Garnet. Ruby and Sapphire are present, capable of surfacing when the emotional stakes become high enough, capable of speaking in their own voices when something needs to be said that Garnet as a unified being cannot say alone. But Garnet's primary mode of existing is as a person. A specific person with specific preferences and habits and emotional responses that are not simply the average of her components, but something that emerged from 5,000 years of continuous practice. Her abilities reflect this wholeness. From Ruby, pyrokinesis, heat, raw physical strength, emotional intensity, devotion to protecting what she loves. From Sapphire, cryokinesis, grace, the ability to see probable futures. From the combination specifically, electrokinesis, electricity that is neither fire nor ice, but a third thing the combination produces that neither can produce alone. Future vision is worth pausing on. For Sapphire individually, it was often paralyzing. She could see probable catastrophic outcomes among the likelihoods and found herself frozen by the weight of what might come. In Garnet, combined with Ruby's conviction that the right response to difficulty is to act now and figure out the rest as you go, the future vision becomes a strategic tool rather than a burden. It tells Garnet where the danger is. Ruby's nature tells Garnet what to do about it. The result is a leader who is decisively strategic in a way that most beings cannot be, because most beings either have the information or have the will, and Garnet has both at the same time. She summons gauntlets from the gemstones in her palms. They are enormous and crystalline, and capable of hitting with force enough to crack mountains and split warship hulls. They can be fired as projectiles. They can channel the electrokinesis she generates, becoming conductors for electricity that strikes with the combined force of fire and ice transmuted into something else. She defeated Jasper in Jailbreak. Jasper, who was designed for war, who emerged from a wartime kindergarten under optimized conditions, who had been described as one of the most formidable soldiers Homeworld ever produced. Garnet fought her one-on-one and won, and sang while doing it. The song matters. Stronger Than You is not just a beautiful piece of music. It is Garnet's thesis statement articulated in the heat of battle. She is not alone. She never was. She is something that exists because two gems chose each other, and that choice is the source of her power, in a way that goes beyond the mechanical sum of their abilities. Garnet sits at the very top of the two-gem fusion tier. She is more powerful than any two-gem fusion built on tension or incomplete trust. More powerful than Opal, her potential equal in raw output who cannot maintain herself reliably. Competitive with or slightly above Sardonyx in direct combat, though Sardonyx's tactical intelligence makes the gap closer than a simple comparison would suggest. What sits above Garnet is the same thing that always sits above any two-gem fusion. Fusions with more components, fusions that include Garnet as a component and then add to it. Garnet's position at the top of the two-gem tier is essentially unchallengeable. She is the gold standard of what two beings who have built their relationship on genuine love and millennia of honest coexistence can become. Sugilite and Malachite. When power cannot find its own direction, there is something simultaneously compelling and instructive about watching a being who is both extremely powerful and barely holding herself together. The show puts two of these at approximately the same level in its implicit hierarchy, and the reasons they are there say different things about what happens when power and stability come apart. Sugilite is the fusion of Garnet and Amethyst. She arrives in Coach Steven with an entrance that suggests she knows exactly how impressive she is, and she is not wrong about that. The transformation is big and operatic. Out of the combined form of two crystal gems emerges something that makes every frame it occupies feel slightly insufficient. She is massive. 5 eyes, 4 arms, dark curling hair around a face that is not particularly interested in being charming. She is voiced by Nicki Minaj, and the casting is exactly right. Enormous, entirely self-assured, slightly menacing in the way that a being who knows she could destroy most things she encounters and is somewhat tempted to is menacing. Her weapon is a flail. Amethyst's whip as the chain and Garnet's clasped gauntlets as the bludgeon. The reach this gives her is enormous, and the mass at the end of that chain hits with force that scales with the angular velocity she can generate when she swings it. In Coach Steven, she demolishes the rebuilt communication hub with essentially one punch. Not a sustained assault. The hub comes apart. The problem with Sugilite is right there in that moment. She demolished the hub quickly because that was the objective, but she was not done. Sugilite does not experience a natural ending to the pleasure of destruction. The combination of Garnet's headstrong nature and Amethyst's love of power creates a being without an adequate off-switch. The longer she stays fused, the more she becomes something separate from either of her components, something that does not want to unfuse, that does not think much about what happens to the people around her, that exists primarily for the feeling of the power itself. Pearl defeats her. This is important to understand correctly. Pearl winning does not mean Pearl is more powerful than Sugilite. Pearl winning means that intelligence and knowing your specific opponent can overcome a raw power differential in the right conditions. Pearl knows Sugilite will swing the flail without thinking about where the swing ends. She positions herself, she lures Sugilite up a slope, and she uses Sugilite's own weapon against her, tripping her so that she tumbles and hits herself, and the impact forces the diffusion. Pearl outthought her. In any fight against someone who cannot outthink her, Sugilite is genuinely terrifying. She has future vision from Garnet, which means she is not actually brainless. But the Amethyst contribution consistently overrides the strategic use of that vision, pushing toward overwhelming immediate force rather than the measured reading of probable futures. The result is a being of extraordinary capability who cannot reliably channel it where she intends. Malachite is the other side of this principle. She is the fusion of Jasper and Lapis Lazuli, formed in the Season 1 finale Jailbreak. Jasper fuses with Lapis because she is losing to Garnet and needs an advantage. Lapis fuses back because she sees an opportunity, not for Jasper, for Steven. She cannot defeat Jasper alone, but she can make herself into a cage. This is the origin of Malachite, a trap set by someone willing to become the trap herself. Malachite is enormous, nearly Alexandrite size on her back legs. 6 arms, 4 functioning as legs in a centaur-like posture that is both impressive and deeply wrong, a body that cannot decide what it is trying to be. Turquoise skin with dark stripes. 4 eyes whose shape changes based on who is dominant. Small and cat-like for Jasper, larger and rounder for Lapis. Her combat potential is frightening. Jasper's raw physical power, her spin dash and comet charge and crash helmet. Lapis's hydrokinesis, which Lapis once demonstrated can drain an ocean. Near large bodies of water, Malachite's power approaches something that the show does not put an upper limit on. She can create water constructs of enormous size, walls of ice, chains and weapons and projectiles from the ocean itself. The limitation is that she is at war with herself every moment she exists. In Chili Tid, Steven dreamwalks into Malachite's internal realm and finds Lapis barely holding Jasper in chains and the effort visible in every line of her. The internal struggle never stops. It is continuous and exhausting. A new, unified personality cannot emerge because the components are at such fundamental odds, and neither of them can maintain any stable version of their individual selves either. By the time Malachite surfaces in Super Watermelon Island, she is barely coherent. Enormous, yes. Powerful, absolutely. But the strategic application of that power, the thing that would make her truly dangerous, is almost entirely absent. Alexandrite brings her down, with the final blow being Opal's bow. Sugilite and Malachite sit at the same tier because they represent the same fundamental principle from different angles. Enormous power potential that cannot be fully realized because the beings generating the power are fighting each other or themselves. Sugilite because the fusion overwhelms the components' individual wills. Malachite because the components' wills are so opposed that no unified will can form at all. Alexandrite, the most powerful stable fusion before Steven. Alexandrite is a fusion of 4 gems, or 5 if you count ruby and sapphire separately. She is garnet plus amethyst plus pearl, everything the pre-Steven Crystal Gem team can produce when they all fuse together. The show introduces her in Fusion Cuisine, a Season 1 episode that is almost entirely comedic in its execution and entirely precise in what it establishes about Alexandrite's defining characteristic. Connie's mother wants to have dinner with Steven's family, and the Crystal Gems elect to fuse into something that can pass as a more conventional parent. The result is Alexandrite, enormous and 6-armed and completely unsuited to small talk over a restaurant menu, who falls apart almost immediately when her components cannot agree on whether to eat a piece of shrimp. This is the show's most efficient possible statement about what Alexandrite is. She is the most powerful thing the Crystal Gems can be together before Steven joins the equation. She is also extremely difficult to keep together because she is composed of 4 gems with their own priorities and histories with each other and their own sense of what matters in any given moment. Her abilities are the full combination of everything her component gems bring individually and in their pairings. All of Garnet's strength and future vision and electrokinesis, all of Pearl's precision and tactical intelligence, all of Amethyst's unpredictability and adaptability. She can use every weapon her components can summon and every combination weapon their pairings produce. Opal's recurve bow, Sugilite's enormous flail, Sardonyx's warhammer, the base weapons of all 4 individual gems. She can switch between weapons in the middle of a fight, a second mouth capable of fire breath, a visor over multiple eyes, 5,000 years of combined combat experience embedded in her as though it were native memory. In Super Watermelon Island, fighting Malachite, she deploys everything she has: the flail, the hammer, the raw physical force. She hits Malachite with weapons that individually would be considered formidable against most opponents, and Malachite takes them and is still standing. The fight goes on, and it is not clean and it is not swift. It takes everything Alexandrite has, and then it takes Opal's bow to end it. This fight is not a demonstration of Alexandrite's weakness. It is a demonstration of what she is capable of sustaining, which is a very long fight against something comparable in power, throwing everything she has available, adapting, switching approaches, fighting intelligently despite the difficulty of maintaining the fusion while doing all of this. The final blow being Opal's bow is not a failure of Alexandrite's other abilities. It is a statement about what precision-ranged combat can do when sustained bludgeoning has established the conditions for it. Alexandrite sits clearly above Garnet because 4 gems are more than 2. She sits above Sugilite because Pearl's presence provides tactical intelligence. Sugilite lacks. She sits above Malachite because her components, for all their difficulty, are working toward the same goal rather than actively against each other. She sits below Obsidian because adding Steven to the equation is not an incremental upgrade, it is a transformation. The fusions at the edges, Bluebird Azurite, Megapearl, and the Topaz fusion, Before we reach the top of the ranking, several fusions sit at the edges of the main progression and deserve acknowledgement. Bluebird Azurite appears in Steven Universe Future, formed from the shared hatred of Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby for Steven specifically. She is the shortest fusion in the franchise, barely larger than her components, which the show implies is the visual expression of a bond built on something narrow. When all two beings share is a grudge, the fusion reflects that narrowness. Her weapon, an ice cutlass combining Eyeball's knife with Aquamarine's cryokinesis, is genuinely dangerous. She is fast and aggressive and requires Alexandrite's intervention to deal with, which tells you exactly where she sits. Real enough to require a serious response, not powerful enough to give that response a significant challenge. She is also, notably, one of the only antagonist fusions who is not redeemed. She leaves the show as she arrived, still resentful, still committed to the limited future that spite can offer. Mega Pearl appears briefly in Steven Universe Future, the fusion of Pearl and Volleyball, the Pink Pearl who served Pink Diamond before Pearl did, and whose left eye carries a scar from Pink Diamond's power. Their fusion is healing in the thematic sense, two pearls shaped differently by the same person, coming together to understand each other. Her weapon is a bladed ribbon wand, Pearl's spear combined with Volleyball's ribbon wand. 2 pearls worth of precision and grace in one form. Brief screen time limits what we can assess, but the foundation suggests genuine capability. The Topaz fusion is 2 yellow topaz gems fused permanently, sent by Yellow Diamond to carry out missions requiring their specific capabilities. She is enormous and silent and menacing in the way that something very large and very quiet tends to be menacing. Her gemstones are on either side of her head in place of ears, and her design communicates that she is built to receive orders and execute them. She can imprison beings within her fused body, which is one of the more unsettling applications of fusion the show presents. In combat, she hits hard enough that a single blow can make Steven's shield buckle in ways that few things do. She is formidable in the direct physical sense that same-type fusions of genuinely powerful gems tend to be. She is defeated by Alexandrite in the show, which places her above the Crystal Gem 3-gem fusions in raw power, and below Alexandrite in terms of actual combat outcome. Obsidian. What the Crystal Gems become when they trust each other completely. The Crystal Temple has stood on the coast of Beach City for as long as any of the humans who live there can remember. It is enormous. It has 2 faces. It contains interior spaces that exceed what its exterior dimensions could possibly contain. And the show tells us, in a detail placed late enough in the series that you need to know a great deal of context to fully absorb it, that the original obsidian, the version formed from rose quartz and pearl and garnet and amethyst before Steven existed, was the basis for the Crystal Temple's design. A building the size of a small mountain was built to look like one specific fusion. That fact has been sitting in the background of the show since the first episode, encoded in the temple's architecture, waiting to be understood. Obsidian appears first in the Season 5 finale Change Your Mind, when the crystal gems need to scale the exterior of White Diamond's ship, not the interior. The outside surface of a vessel roughly the size of a large building, which has no convenient footholds and does not want to be scaled. The solution the show arrives at is simple and spectacular. What if we became something large enough that the ship's exterior is just a wall to climb? Obsidian forms, and she is that thing. She is immense in a way that goes beyond the simple category of large. She has 8 arms, arranged to allow for the kind of grip and leverage that scaling a vertical surface at this scale requires. She has 2 faces. The first is a mask, serene and dark, and behind it is a second face that opens into a mouth full of lava. She moves with the deliberateness of something that has never encountered a reason to be in a hurry, because nothing it has met has given it one. Her weapon is a greatsword, and the way the sword is forged is one of the most visually extraordinary moments in the show's entire run. She does not simply summon it, she builds it. Pearl's spear and Garnet's gauntlets and Amethyst's whip come together to form the hilt, and then she presses that hilt into her second mouth, into the lava there, and she holds it while the heat does what heat does to metal, and when she draws it out, it is enormous and red-hot and burning and ready. The blade is a forge product. She is her own smithy. The sword that comes out is all of her components' weapons fused into a hilt and given a blade made of herself. In the Season 5 finale, she uses that sword on Yellow Diamond and Blue Diamond's ships, interstellar vessels. Ships built by a civilization that has been engineering for tens of thousands of years, whose technology exceeds human capability by an enormous margin. Obsidian cuts through them, one swing each. She does not appear to strain. This is not on the same scale as anything else the crystal gems do individually. Garnet can crack mountains, and Garnet is genuinely powerful. Garnet needed a sustained fight to deal with Jasper, a single gem soldier. Obsidian destroys interstellar warships with one swing each, and does not look like she is working very hard. Lava generation is the unique, emergent ability that Obsidian possesses that no component can produce individually. Ruby has fire. Sapphire has ice. Their combination in Garnet produces electricity. But the combination of all five, including Steven with his connection to Pink Diamond's power and his hybrid nature, produces something volcanic. The show is precise about this connection to the real-world mineral, to volcanic glass, to lava cooled rapidly into something new. Obsidian is the gem equivalent of that process. Her stability in the Season 5 finale is notable for a fusion of this complexity. She does not appear to be straining. She does not defuse under the stress of the situation. She completes the mission and defuses when the mission is complete, not because she cannot maintain herself. Whether this reflects the emotional state of the crystal gems in that moment, all five of them finally on the same page with no more secrets between them, or whether Obsidian as a configuration is inherently more stable than her component count would suggest, the show does not specify. The result is a fusion that holds together under conditions that would stress any other configuration the crystal gems can produce. Obsidian sits alone at the top of this ranking, not because she is the largest thing in the show, not because her sword is the most cinematically spectacular weapon, but because she represents the fullest expression of everything the show has been building toward in its treatment of fusion. She is what the crystal gems become when they have done all the work the show spent 5 seasons watching them struggle to do, when the secrets are out and the grief has been expressed, and the trust has been rebuilt, and the love has been chosen again with full knowledge of what everything costs. She is what becomes possible when more people choose each other completely, with nothing held back. A deeper look at Garnet, 5,000 years of what love means in practice. We touched on Garnet above, but she deserves more space. She is, in many respects, the entire argument of the show compressed into one character. Think about what Garnet actually is, in the most precise possible terms. She is two beings, a ruby and a sapphire, who met for approximately 90 seconds before their first fusion, who then chose each other in defiance of the civilization that created them, who have been continuously fused for over 5,000 years, and who at no point during those 5,000 years of continuous existence ever once felt like they needed to explain themselves to anyone. That last part matters more than it might seem. The show is full of characters who are ashamed of what they are. Pearl spent thousands of years unable to be fully herself because she was compelled to keep a secret that defined her entire relationship to Rose. Amethyst spent decades feeling like a mistake because she came out wrong relative to the standard for her type. Steven spent much of the first 4 seasons of the show feeling the weight of his mother's legacy pressing down on him from all sides. Fusion, for most of the fusions in the show, carries some element of vulnerability or embarrassment or the need to justify itself. Garnet just is. She does not perform justification. She does not explain herself. She exists as herself with a totality that is quiet and enormous, and specifically the result of 5,000 years of choosing to exist that way every single moment. Chew. The stability this produces in combat is real and measurable. Garnet cannot be easily rattled. Things that would destabilize a less settled fusion, sudden changes in the situation, emotional provocations from opponents, the pain of taking a hit, do not break Garnet's internal coherence. She processes, adjusts, and continues. The future vision helps her anticipate, which means she is rarely genuinely surprised. And Ruby's emotional intensity, which might seem like a liability in a being that needs to remain coherent under pressure, is in Garnet channeled into a determination that functions as a form of armor. She does not stop. She does not give up. The thought of giving up does not appear to present itself to her as an option. Her combat record throughout the show reflects this. She defeats Jasper. She defeats Peridot twice without appearing to work very hard. She subdues corrupted gems throughout the series with efficiency that speaks to millennia of practice. She goes toe-to-toe with Malachite as part of Alexandrite and contributes the sustained force that eventually allows Opal's precision shot to land. She fights the Topaz fusion in Season 4 without losing. There is also the matter of what Garnet does when she is not fighting. Because she is a leader, and the show is interested in what kind of leader she is. Garnet leads through trust. She gives Steven space to try things and fail and learn, because she has future vision and she can see that the attempt is worth making even when it does not succeed. She gives Amethyst validation without coddling, recognizing both what Amethyst needs to hear and what she needs to discover for herself. She gives Pearl structure and reliability, which is what Pearl, who spent thousands of years with her entire identity organized around one person, most needs from the people she lives with. She is also the person who, when the secrets finally come out and the show has to decide who Steven learns the truth from, consistently chooses truth over comfort. She does not tell Steven about his mother's complicated history with comfortable framing. She does not soften it. She gives him the information he needs, even when the information is painful, because she was made from a choice that required someone to know the truth and act on it, rather than accepting the comfortable version. Garnet is, in the end, love that has decided to be something, not love that is content to feel like itself. Love that has looked at the world and chosen to be a force in it, with all the strength and the stability and the particular kind of indomitable presence that choosing involves. She sits where she sits in the ranking because of everything above. And she sits near the top of what any two gems can be because, in 5,000 years, she has never wavered. Malachite, a detailed portrait of fusion gone wrong. Malachite deserves more space than she got in the initial section, because she is not just a powerful antagonist. She is the show's most sustained and precise argument about what happens when the thing holding two people together is not love but need and hatred, and the inability to let go. Lapis Lazuli's history before the show begins is one of the most quietly devastating backstories in the series. She was a gem caught on Earth during the Gem War, trapped in a mirror as punishment or as a weapon or as a consequence of being in the wrong place, and held in that mirror for thousands of years. She could see and hear but not act, could not communicate, could not do anything except watch as the world moved around her container. And then a human child found the mirror and spoke to her, and she was able to speak back, and eventually Steven healed the crack in her gem that had been preventing her from using her powers, and she was free. She went home. She found that home was not what she remembered, or perhaps was exactly what she remembered, and she had simply forgotten that home was a place that never particularly cared about her. She was interrogated. She escaped. She got away. And then she was captured again and brought back to Earth as a resource for Peridot's mission. And she saw an opportunity. The fusion with Jasper was Lapis seeing a chance to ensure that Jasper could not hurt Steven. Not to fight Jasper, not to win some battle, to trap her. To contain the threat by becoming the container. She accepted the suffering of the fusion because the alternative was leaving Jasper loose and capable of going back for Steven, and Lapis had made a choice about that without quite articulating it to herself. Steven was someone she was going to protect. The cost was acceptable. What she did not fully reckon with was how long it would last, or what it would cost her over that duration. Malachite spends several months at the bottom of the ocean. Lapis holds Jasper in chains made of water, and holds the fusion together through sheer will, and the effort is visible every time the show gives us a glimpse inside. She is not winning, exactly. She is containing. And the difference between winning and containing is that containing requires continuous effort, requires never relaxing, requires staying alert to the possibility of the thing you are containing gaining ground. It is exhausting in a way that winning is not. In Chili Tid, Steven dreamwalks into Malachite's internal realm. He finds a dark place where a smaller Lapis holds a chained Jasper in a sea of black water. Jasper tells him she will win eventually, that Lapis is getting tired, that the internal battle is going in one direction. And Lapis tells him to go, that she has to concentrate, that the effort of the conversation is more than she can spare. By the time Malachite surfaces in Super Watermelon Island, something has shifted. Lapis has lost herself to the fusion in a way that the show depicts carefully. She is no longer entirely distinct from Malachite. She is no longer purely the one holding the chains. She is something that has been in a war for so long that the war has become her default state, and defaulting to war is how people lose themselves. Alexandrite defeats her, and then Lapis and Jasper fall out of the fusion on a beach. And Lapis says something that is one of the most honest lines in the show. I was so lost in being Malachite, I almost forgot that I was doing it to protect you. Almost. But I never gave up. And now, I never have to do it again. She flies away. She leaves Jasper behind. She chooses herself, for the first time in the series, fully and without negotiation. Malachite in the power ranking sits where she does because her potential is enormous and her ability to realize it is compromised by the fundamental flaw in her foundation. Near large bodies of water, at full function, she is arguably more destructive than anything else the show gives us except Obsidian. The hydrokinesis that Lapis brings to the combination, at its maximum scale, can manipulate oceans. Add Jasper's strength and comet charge and crash helmet to that water-bending capability, and you have a being who should be, theoretically, able to simply drown any opponent in an infinite supply of her most powerful weapon. She should be near the top of this list. She is not, because should be and is are different things in Steven Universe, and the should be version of Malachite never existed. The version that existed was at war with herself from the moment of formation. The version that existed was two people whose relationship was not love but mutual imprisonment, and that is not a foundation from which sustained power can be reliably drawn. She is, in the end, a tragedy with enormous potential, which might be the most precise description of what happens when people stay in things they should leave. They become versions of themselves with enormous potential that they can never quite access. Alexandrite, the promise, and the limit. Alexandrite is worth dwelling on as a specific case study in what the show understands about the relationship between power and function, because she makes the point more clearly than any other fusion. She is, by any objective component count measure, more powerful than anything else the crystal gems can produce, short of Obsidian. She contains Garnet, who is already the most stable and one of the most powerful fusions the show gives us. She contains Amethyst, whose raw physical capability and shape-shifting versatility add something genuinely different to the mix. She contains Pearl, whose tactical intelligence and precision and future vision access through Garnet round out a profile that should, in theory, be devastating. In theory. The practical reality of Alexandrite is that she defuses over a piece of shrimp. That is not a joke the show makes at her expense. That is the show being extremely precise about what her actual limitation is. 4 gems with their own personalities and priorities and histories with each other can agree on a great deal. They can agree that protecting the Earth matters. They can agree that Steven matters. They can agree that this specific mission is worth pursuing, and that the people in their way are obstacles to be overcome. They cannot always agree on whether to eat the shrimp. This sounds trivial until you think about what the shrimp represents in the context of the characters. Pearl does not want to eat anything, ever. Partly because she literally cannot process food, and partly because she is deeply identified with her status as something beyond ordinary organic need. Amethyst very much wants to eat things, always, because eating is one of the ways she connects to the human world that she grew up adjacent to and loves unreservedly. Garnet is trying to keep the peace between them, while also executing the mission objective of convincing Connie's mother that she is a plausible parent, which requires her to override both of their impulses simultaneously for an extended period. The shrimp is not about food. The shrimp is about the ongoing tension between Pearl's need to be a certain kind of thing and Amethyst's need to be a different kind of thing, and the way that tension runs through every interaction they have, every choice they make, every moment when they have to negotiate who they are relative to each other. Alexandrite defuses because that tension, momentarily, is bigger than the thing that is trying to hold them together. In combat, this plays out differently. The threat is an external organizing principle that 4 gems can generally agree on in a way that disagreements about food choices do not offer. When Malachite needs to be stopped, Pearl and Amethyst and Garnet agree on that. They are all pointing in the same direction. The fusion holds, and it holds under significant stress, taking hits from Malachite and continuing. But the holding requires continuous agreement in a way that a more fundamental unity does not. Garnet does not need to be continuously agreed upon within herself. She is Garnet. She is settled. The alignment between Ruby and Sapphire is not a choice they make repeatedly throughout a fight. It is the condition of their existence. Alexandrite, by contrast, is a coalition that has to keep renewing its mandate in real time, and coalitions under sustained pressure fracture in ways that settled identities do not. This is the specific thing Obsidian adds that makes her the clear top of the ranking, rather than simply a larger Alexandrite. When Steven joins the crystal gems in the fusion, the agreement that holds the whole together becomes something different. Not just 4 gems aligning around a common purpose. 5 beings, one of whom is constitutionally incapable of giving up on people, one of whom has spent 5,000 years as a proof that love creates things the universe has never seen before, one of whom has processed the loss of her entire assumed identity and found herself on the other side of it, one of whom has finally made peace with where she came from, one of whom carried his mother's mistakes and his mother's love equally, and found a way to be neither her shadow nor her replacement. When those 5 fuse, what holds them together is not just common purpose. It is the sum of everything they have been to each other across 5 seasons of choosing to keep showing up. Alexandrite is what they can be when they are aligned. Obsidian is what they can be when they are whole. On the matter of stability, why the ranking sometimes surprises you. If you have been paying attention to the ranking as it has been building, you may have noticed something that feels slightly counterintuitive. Stability contributes as much to where a fusion lands as raw power does. This is intentional. The show is quite deliberate about this particular point. Consider, Sugilite is objectively a more powerful fusion than Opal in terms of raw destructive output. The flail versus the bow is not a close comparison for direct damage. But Sugilite defused in her first episode because she could not control herself, and Opal in the movie shows up composed and capable and holding together with apparent ease. If you put them in a sustained engagement rather than a single moment of maximum force, the outcome is less clear. Sugilite's willingness to keep going might eventually overwhelm Opal's precision, or Opal's ability to operate at range and remain coherent might eventually find the shot that ends it. The stability ranking is not just about who wins a fight. It is about who can be counted on to fight when they are called upon, for as long as the fight needs to last, without falling apart before it is over. This is also why Garnet sits so high relative to other 2-gem fusions. Not just because she is strong, but because she is available. Pearl and Amethyst cannot produce Opal reliably. Opal requires a specific state of harmony that Pearl and Amethyst have to actively achieve, and that they have historically struggled to maintain. Garnet is simply there, continuously, without requiring achievement. She is Garnet always, which means that in any situation where the crystal gems need their most capable member, Garnet is present and ready in a way that Opal is not. This principle scales upward. Obsidian is the most powerful fusion the crystal gems have access to, and she appeared in the Season 5 finale at a moment when all the raft of her components were as completely aligned as they have ever been. Whether she could be called upon reliably under less extraordinary circumstances is a question the show leaves open. The implication is that she requires something close to the emotional state that produced her in that finale, which means she is not a resource that can be deployed casually. This is the show's subtlest argument about power. The most powerful things are often available only in the moments when you have done the most work. Obsidian requires all 5 crystal gems to be fully present and fully honest with themselves and with each other. That is not a state that can be manufactured on demand. It has to be arrived at through the specific journey that the series documents. You cannot skip to Obsidian. You have to earn her. The voices of the fusions. A note on how the show uses sound. There is something the show does with its fusions that goes beyond visual design and narrative function, something that the power ranking cannot quantify, but that is worth naming before we close out. Every significant fusion in Steven Universe has a voice that is doing something specific. Garnet is voiced by Estelle, a British singer whose real-world work has a kind of settled authority to it that carries directly into the character. Garnet speaks with a directness and a depth that communicates that she has been around for a very long time and has nothing to prove. The voice is not performing anything. It is simply there, the way Garnet is simply there. Sugilite is voiced by Nicki Minaj, and the choice is extraordinary in how perfectly it captures the specific kind of enormous self-assurance that is also its own vulnerability. Sugilite knows she is impressive and says so and enjoys saying so, and the voice carries all of that in a register that is impossible to separate from the specific reality of the performer who delivered it. Sardonyx is voiced by Alexia Kadime, who plays her as a theatrical personality who is entirely conscious of the performance she is giving and utterly unashamed of that fact. The voice has the quality of someone who has decided that everything worth doing is worth doing with flair, and that flair is not incompatible with genuine effectiveness. Stevani is voiced by A.J. Michalka, and the quality of the performance is a careful balance between the two components. You can hear Steven in there, and you can hear Connie in there, but you can also hear a third thing that is specifically Stevani, something that comes through in the moments when the voice settles into itself, rather than into either of its sources. Opal is voiced by Amy Mann, a folk and indie rock musician whose performing voice has a quality of meditative distance that suits Opal absolutely. You hear someone who is genuinely somewhere else even when she is right in front of you, someone beautiful and slightly unreachable. Steg is voiced by Ted Leo, who is in a band called The Both with Amy Mann, which the show uses directly when Steg and Opal perform a duet together in the movie. The two voice actors have performed together in real life, and what that familiarity produces in the film, when their characters sing together, is a naturalness that carries through the animation. Steg and Opal feel like two beings who know how to share a stage, because their voice actors actually do. Smokey Quartz is voiced by Natasha Lyonne, whose voice carries a specific quality of having seen some things and still being willing to show up for the next thing. There is warmth in it, and there is self-awareness, and there is a willingness to make fun of the situation even when the situation is genuinely difficult, which is exactly who Smokey Quartz is. The voices are the show caring about every dimension of these characters. The visual design is extraordinary, and the narrative function is careful, and the thematic meaning is precise. And then the show goes and casts people who can voice these fusions in ways that make them feel complete, real, as if they exist between the moments the show shows you. That quality of feeling real, of feeling like they exist when you are not watching them, is what makes the power ranking feel worth doing. These are not hypothetical entities. They are characters who happen to be rankings. And the ranking serves the characters, not the other way around. The show's final argument about power. The Season 5 finale of Steven Universe is called Change Your Mind, and the title is the show's thesis. Not fight harder, not become stronger, change your mind. The crystal gems form obsidian to get to white diamond. Obsidian, the most powerful fusion in the show, the one who climbs the outside of a ship with her bare hands and cuts interstellar warships in half like they are made of paper. They form her because they need to reach white diamond, and reaching white diamond requires power, the power to climb, the power to cut through what is in the way, and then they defuse. And Steven walks into White Diamond's chamber, and he does not fight her. He talks to her. He insists, in the face of a being who is more powerful than anything the show has put in front of him, that she is wrong about herself and wrong about him, and that the wrongness can be fixed. This is the show's final argument about power. It required the most powerful fusion in the crystal gem's arsenal to get to the moment. And then the moment itself required something that no fusion could provide. A single human gem hybrid boy standing in a white chamber and refusing to give up on someone who had given up on everything outside herself. Obsidian was the door. Steven was what walked through it. This is why the ranking matters, and also why it is beside the point at the same time. The power levels are real, and they reflect real things about the characters and their relationships and what those relationships have built. And the show's argument is that power, even enormous transforming power, exists in service of something beyond itself. Every fusion in this ranking was formed by someone who cared about something or someone. Even Malachite, built on hatred, was built on Lapis caring enough about Steven to accept tremendous suffering to protect him. Even Bluebird Azurite, built on spite, represents two beings who felt something strongly enough to become something together. The feeling was the wrong kind, but the mechanism was the same. The fusions at the top of this list are there because the feelings underneath them were large and clear and long-lasting enough to produce something enormous. And the fusions at the bottom are there because the feelings were small or narrow or temporary or aimed at the wrong things. But they are all fusions. They are all what happens when beings feel something strongly enough to become something together. And that, more than any power level, is what makes them worth ranking. A note on what we did not see. There are fusions implied by the show that were never depicted, and they are worth a brief mention before we close. Ruby and Pearl could theoretically fuse, given that Ruby is half of Garnet, who has fused with Pearl into Sardonyx. The result would be a two-gem fusion of moderate individual power that the show has never shown us, and that would likely be named some form of rhodonite variant. Whether their relationship, which the show portrays as warm but not particularly intimate, would produce something stable is an open question. Sapphire and amethyst, sapphire and pearl, ruby and amethyst, these are all fusions that would produce named gems the show has never depicted. The creative team has confirmed that all of these combinations are theoretically possible. What they would look like, what their personalities would be, what weapons they would produce, exists only in imagination and in the considerable body of fan creative work that has been exploring these questions since the show began. Lapis lazuli and any of the crystal gems is another category of the unshown. Lapis joins the crystal gems loosely toward the end of the series, but she never fuses with any of them on screen. A fusion of Lapis and Pearl, combining Lapis's hydrokinesis with Pearl's precision, would be extraordinary. A fusion of Lapis and Garnet would add water manipulation to an already formidable package in a way that might push the resulting fusion above Alexandrite in certain contexts. These are unranked because they are unshown, and the ranking is about what the show actually gave us. But the space of possible fusions the show gestured toward and did not fully depict is vast, and it is part of what makes the world feel inhabited by more than what we were shown. The map extends beyond the borders of the story. There are fusions possible that the show never had time for, and that is probably as it should be. The space between the numbers. We have been through the full list. Every fusion the show gave us, from watermelon tourmaline to obsidian, assessed as fairly as the evidence allows, and yet the ranking, for all its care, is not the point. The point is sitting with the fusions as what they actually are, expressions of the specific relationships that made them. Garnet is Ruby and Sapphire choosing each other in a cave in the rain. Stevonnie is Steven and Connie discovering, in the middle of dancing together, that what they are to each other is something that does not have a name yet. Malachite is Lapis deciding that she can bear anything if it means someone she cares about is safe. Every entry on this list is a feeling made visible. Every one of them is two or more beings standing in the space where their relationship lives and discovering what that space can become when they trust it. Obsidian is the crystal gems discovering that the space where all of their relationships converge after 5 seasons of difficulty and secrets and growth is something that can forge a sword from its own mouth and cut interstellar warships in half. That is a specific and beautiful and enormous thing to discover about yourself. And it required all of the other fusions first. The ones that fell apart, the ones that were never very powerful and held together anyway. The ones built on wrong foundations that eventually broke and left the people inside them better for knowing what it feels like to break. You cannot skip to Obsidian. You have to earn her. All of these fusions are part of earning her, even the ones at the bottom of the list, even the watermelon tourmalines and the lemon jades and the quintuple ruby fusions that could not think their way past their own impulsiveness. They are all part of the show's argument about what fusion is for. It is for becoming something you could not be alone. That is the ranking. That is the show. Good night. Final call to action. If you made it this far, you are the kind of person this channel exists for. You stayed, you listened, you sat with it. Please subscribe if you have not. There are more of these coming. More long, relaxed, deep dives into the corners of shows that deserve the time. Hit the like button if this found you at the right moment. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it? And which fusion, out of everything we covered tonight, is the one you would revisit first? I want to know. Sleep well when you get there. All content is based on verified information from the Steven Universe animated series, Seasons 1 through 5, 2013 to 2019. Steven Universe, the movie, 2019, and Steven Universe Future, 2019 to 2020, created by Rebecca Sugar and produced by Cartoon Network Studios. The full ranking, from the bottom of the list to the top, watermelon, tourmaline, and lemon jade at the very bottom. Same type or briefly glimpsed fusions, meaningful primarily for what they say about fusion as a fact of gem life, rather than what they demonstrate in combat. The ruby fusions, scaling with number but lacking the tactical flexibility to convert size into decisive advantage against a thinking opponent. Rhodonite, capable and emotionally significant, limited by the relatively minor individual power of her components and years spent in hiding rather than training. Bluebird azurite, dangerous within real limits. built on a narrow foundation that constrains her ceiling. Stevani in the lower middle range, stable, capable, genuinely formidable, held back by the predominantly human nature of the fusion. Steg just above, remarkable in his unique non-combat power, unknown in his combat potential, placed with the benefit of the doubt the evidence warrants. Mega Pearl, in this range, 2 pearls worth of precision briefly glimpsed, placed where a same-type fusion of capable gems with limited screen time logically lands. The Topaz fusion above them, genuinely formidable in direct combat, below Alexandrite in actual outcome. Sunstone and Rainbow Quartz, 2 in the upper middle range, each representing what Steven's hybrid nature adds to an existing crystal gem's capabilities, operating from different emphases with roughly equivalent effectiveness. Opal above them, with a ceiling that may exceed theirs in fully focused circumstances, held back by the stability problem that defined her for most of the show's run. Smoky Quartz alongside or slightly below Sardonyx, creative and resilient and demonstrably capable, unique in ways the show has not fully explored. Sardonyx just above, future vision plus tactical precision, giving her a real edge in direct combat. Garnet standing clearly above all 2 gem fusions, the gold standard of what permanent love and chosen coexistence produce. Sugalite and Malachite at the same tier, enormous power potential that cannot be reliably converted into effective application because the foundations are fractured. Alexandrite above them, the most powerful stable fusion the crystal gems can produce, without Steven. Obsidian alone at the top. What fusion actually is, one more time. You have made it through all of them. Every fusion this show gave us, from the background detail that appears for 3 seconds to the lava-forging giant who climbed the exterior of an alien ship with her bare hands. The night is quiet around you now. The ranking is done. Here is the last thing worth saying. The show builds this ranking carefully, over 5 seasons, and the evidence for it is real and worth knowing. And then in its final acts, it makes very clear that the ranking is beside the point. Obsidian is the most powerful fusion we see. And what does she do with that power? She climbs a ship. She cuts down some vessels. She gets the crystal gems to where they need to be. And then she defuses, back into Steven and Amethyst and Pearl and Garnet, 4 separate people standing in the place they need to stand to do the thing they actually came to do. Which is to talk. Which is to say the true thing. Which is to reach a being who has been enclosed in enforced perfection for longer than recorded history and say, "You do not have to be this. You can come out now." The power was in service of the conversation, not the other way around. Steg, at the bottom of the combat ranking, does more meaningful work in Steven Universe, the movie, than almost anything else that forms during the film. He does not fight anyone. He plays music, and Pearl and Amethyst remember who they are, and without that, nothing else can happen. The ranking cannot fully account for what Steg did in that moment. But the moment was real. This is what fusion is, in the end. Not a leaderboard. It is the question of what 2 people become when they trust each other enough to find out. Sometimes what they become can defeat interstellar warships. Sometimes what they become can float above a crisis and play the exact right song until the people who were lost remember the way home. Both of those things are fusion. Both are what this show is about. The rankings are real, and the power levels are as accurate as the evidence permits. And underneath all of it, informing all of it, making all of it worth caring about, is the argument that relationships are the source of power, not the other way around. That what we become together is determined by what we put into each other before the music starts. And that what we can become, when we finally stop keeping things from the people we love, is something we could not have imagined being alone. Good night. Get some sleep. Garnet is on the coast of Beach City, steady as ever, the proof still standing after 5,000 years. Stevani is somewhere, themselves and more than themselves. Obsidian is possible whenever 5 specific people who have done the work decide to trust each other completely, all at once. All of them waiting, all of them real. If you enjoyed this, a like genuinely helps more than you might think. And if you have not subscribed yet, right now would be an excellent time, because there is a great deal more of this kind of thing coming your way. Tell me in the comments, which fusion means the most to you? Not necessarily the strongest one. The one that stayed with you? The one that made you stop for a minute after the episode ended and just sit there with it? I want to know what you will say. Good night. All information in this script is based on verified content from the Steven Universe animated series, seasons 1 through 5, 2013 to 2019, Steven Universe, the movie, 2019, and Steven Universe Future, 2019 to 2020, created by Rebecca Sugar and produced by Cartoon Network Studios. The off-color fusions and what they mean beyond the ranking. We spent time on rhodonite and mentioned fluorite and watermelon tourmaline, but the off-color fusions as a group deserve their own moment of reflection because they represent something the main power ranking cannot quite capture. The off-colors are gems who were rejected by Homeworld, defective by the system's definition. Their defects vary. Padparadsha's future vision runs on a delay, so it tells the past instead of the future. The Rudel twins emerged as two conjoined bodies from a single gemstone in a way that has no Homeworld precedent. Rhodonite is a mixed-type fusion that should not exist. Fluorite is a permanent fusion of 6 gems, a configuration so far outside the standard that Homeworld has no framework for it at all. And these beings, cast out from the civilization that made them, found each other in underground tunnels and built something. Not a rebellion, not an organization with a mission, just a community, a small group of people who were all wrong in different ways and chose to be wrong together, which in the logic of this show is its own kind of rightness. Fluorite is the most striking of the off-color fusions from a power perspective because she is 6 gems fused together permanently, a configuration that by the show's own internal logic should be among the most formidable things we encounter. 6 gems, 6 weapon sets, 6 personalities finding their equilibrium in a single enormous caterpillar-shaped form that moves through the world with the patience of something that does not experience time the way others do. And yet Fluorite never fights anyone. She barely moves at speed. She speaks slowly, thinks slowly, expresses herself in long, gentle sentences that arrive at their conclusions after considerable unhurried travel. She is the off-color who seems least interested in anything that would constitute power in the conventional sense, and the most interested in connection and in time and in the quiet texture of the life she has built with the people she has chosen. Whether Fluorite is powerful in combat is a question the show refuses to answer. She is never tested, and the refusal to test her is its own kind of statement. Not everything needs to be a weapon. Not everything that could be formidable needs to prove it. Fluorite is 6 gems fused together out of love and choice and the long, slow accretion of connection, and she has nothing to demonstrate to anyone. She just is. And the just is of Fluorite is one of the show's quietest and most complete arguments about what a good life for a gem might look like. In the ranking, Fluorite sits in an unresolved position that the ranking cannot cleanly assign. 6 gem fusion should be above Alexandrite in raw power potential, but she has never been tested and the show seems uninterested in testing her, which means assigning her a confident position above Alexandrite would be speculation presented as fact. She is noted here as an unresolved case that the show made a deliberate choice not to resolve, and that deliberateness feels correct. Rhodonite and watermelon tourmaline we have discussed. The Ruby Squad fusions we have discussed. Lemon Jade we have discussed. The point to emphasize before we move on is that the off-color fusions are not the ranking's weakest entries because they are failures. They are near the bottom because they were never given the resources, the training, the stability, or the safety to become anything other than survivors. And surviving, as Rhodonite demonstrates every time she holds herself together in a world that considers her existence illegal, is its own kind of power that the ranking cannot fully honor. How the weapons reveal the relationships. There is a design principle embedded in the way fusion weapons work in this show that is worth pulling out explicitly, because it illuminates something about the fusions themselves. Every fusion weapon is a combination of the component weapons. Pearl's spear combines with Amethyst's whip to form Opal's bow. Garnet's gauntlets and Amethyst's whip form Sugalite's flail. Garnet's gauntlets and Pearl's spear form Sardonyx's warhammer. And on up, Alexandrite can use all of the above, and Obsidian takes all of the crystal gem weapons and fuses them into a hilt that she then uses as a mold for a blade she forges herself in her own lava mouth. But the fusions involving Steven break the pattern in a specific and deliberate way. Steven's weapon is a shield, a defensive tool, something that takes the impact of things coming at it. And every time Steven fuses with another crystal gem, the resulting weapon is something that does not look like a traditional weapon at all. A yo-yo. suction cups, a parasol, a double-necked guitar. This is the show saying something precise about Steven's nature. He is not, at his core, an offensive force. He is a connector. He is a protector. He is someone whose first instinct is not to strike, but to hold, to catch, to absorb. And when his shield combines with other weapons, it does not produce things designed to break. It produces things designed to reach. The yo-yo reaches. You spin it out and it goes and it comes back. The suction cups grab onto surfaces and hold on. The parasol catches people when they fall. The guitar reaches people through music. All of Steven's fusion weapons are fundamentally about connection rather than destruction. And this is the show's argument, embedded in the design, about what Steven adds to any fusion. He does not make the fusions more destructive. He makes them more connected. He orients them toward the thing the show ultimately believes matters most, which is the ability to reach someone who needs to be reached. Obsidian is the apparent exception, with her enormous greatsword forged from lava. But even there, the hilt is formed from all the crystal gem's weapons fused together, and the blade is made from within Obsidian herself. She is her own source. She does not take something from outside herself to strike with. She builds her weapon from the combination of everything she is. And what she uses it for, in the finale, is to clear a path to a conversation. The sword serves the conversation. The power serves the connection. Even at the very top of the ranking, the design principle holds. Rainbow Quartz, the original and what it means that she existed. We have covered Rainbow Quartz 2 at length, but the original Rainbow Quartz deserves more space than she typically gets, because understanding her helps you understand what Pearl and Rose were to each other, which is one of the most complex relationships in the show. The original Rainbow Quartz is the fusion of Rose Quartz and Pearl. She appears in We Need to Talk, a Season 2 flashback episode that exists to show us the moment Greg first encountered fusion. He had asked Rose, early in their relationship, whether the two of them could be a real couple, given the complications of Rose being an immortal magical alien warrior, and Greg being a human man who played guitar and drove a van. And Rose, rather than answer the question, showed him the music video she and Pearl had made. During the filming of the music video, Pearl suggests they fuse, to show Greg what they have. To show Greg, who is competing with Pearl for Rose's attention without knowing he is competing, that he is outmatched. Rainbow Quartz forms, and she is beautiful. She is elegant and long-limbed, and she dances with the grace of someone who has had thousands of years to learn to move. And she looks at Greg with something that is not quite hostility but is not warmth either. Pearl's feelings toward Greg, in those early years, were complicated and jealous, and deeply connected to her grief about the possibility of losing what she had with Rose. Rainbow Quartz carries that. She moves well, and she is not particularly kind. This is significant for the power ranking because it tells us something about what Rainbow Quartz was capable of. She is a fusion of Rose Quartz, who is Pink Diamond, and Pearl, who is one of the most skilled fighters among the crystal gems. The combination of Rose's healing, her shield, her physical capability as a diamond with centuries of experience on Earth, and Pearl's precision and tactical intelligence would produce something formidable. We do not see Rainbow Quartz fight. She dances in a music video and then defuses, and the show moves on, but the implied power level is high. Rose Quartz as a component brings diamond-level capability to the fusion, which puts the original Rainbow Quartz in a category separate from all other crystal gem fusions. She would be, by this logic, more powerful than Alexandrite. The show does not put the original Rainbow Quartz in the power ranking directly, and neither does this ranking, because she is seen in one brief flashback and never in any context that allows for combat assessment. But she is worth naming as the implied upper bound on what two-gem crystal gem fusions involving Rose could have produced, which is a category that includes the fusion whose design forms the basis for the Crystal Temple itself. Steven Universe Future and what it adds to the power ranking. Steven Universe Future, the short epilogue series that ran in 2019 and 2020, adds several fusions that shift the power landscape in interesting ways. Most significantly, it gives us Mega Pearl and Bluebird Azurite, which we have covered. But it also shows us what the fusions we already knew look like in a changed world, after the events of the main series and the movie have been integrated. Stevonnie appears in Future in a different register than in the earlier series. They have always been capable, But the Connie component has continued to develop in the intervening period, and the fusion reflects that. Stevani in Future is more confident, more settled, less surprised by themselves. The relationship between Steven and Connie has matured, and what that maturity produces in Fusion is a more stable and more capable Stevani. Garnet appears in Future still as Garnet, which is its own statement. Even after the revelations about Rose Quartz and the events of the movie and the full emotional upheaval of the series finale, Ruby and Sapphire are still together, still choosing each other. Garnet is still Garnet, still the proof, still standing. The new fusion the series most explicitly develops is the relationship between Steven and the Crystal Gems as a group. The final episode of Future, a very special episode, is actually not about that. But the thematic arc of Future is about Steven learning that he is allowed to need things, to feel things, to not be okay, and the Crystal Gems learning to support him in that rather than needing him to be okay for their sake. This emotional development is what Obsidian in a hypothetical future context would look like. Not more powerful necessarily, just more available. 5 beings who have done the work of understanding each other, who no longer need a season finale crisis to reach the level of alignment that Obsidian requires. The fusion would still be enormous and still carry the lava sword and still be at the top of the ranking, but it would come from a more everyday place. Less earned through crisis, more simply true. That is, arguably, what the entire arc of the show was building toward. Not a single enormous climactic transformation, but the possibility of the enormous transformation being available at will, because the relationships that make it possible have been built well enough to sustain it without requiring extraordinary circumstances to produce it. Steven Universe Future is, in this reading, about reaching the point where Obsidian is just something that can happen, and that is a beautiful place to land. The corrupted fusions, a brief acknowledgement. There is a category of fusions we have not discussed, the corrupted fusions. Gems who were already corrupted by the Diamond Light at the end of the Gem War, and who then fused with each other or with other corrupted gems, producing entities that are simultaneously more powerful than their individual components and more distressed, more lost, less able to express what they are. Zebra Jasper is the most clearly depicted of these. Jasper, already large and powerful and formidable, who fused with a corrupted Ocean Jasper during the Season 5 arc, producing something enormous and centaur-shaped and deeply unstable. The show places Zebra Jasper in the same physical territory as the other very large fusions, but makes clear that this fusion is a tragedy rather than a triumph, a being whose power comes at the cost of everything that makes power worth having. The cluster gems we have already acknowledged as outside the main ranking for the reasons stated at the beginning. But the corrupted fusions that appear in the series, the ones that Steven encounters and has to bubble over the course of his adventures, represent a whole population of gems whose power was never properly assessed because their fusion, whatever it was before the corruption, is now inseparable from the distress of what they became. They sit outside the ranking as the forced fusions do, not because their power is not real, but because ranking the distressed is a kind of assessment that feels wrong, in a show whose central argument is that the content of a being matters more than its size. They are acknowledged, grieved, and left in the space they occupy, real, powerful suffering, eventually healed, returned to themselves by the same diamond combination that injured them in the first place. The healing of all the corrupted gems is one of the show's most emotionally complex moments because it is simultaneous, and it is enormous, and it is accompanied by the understanding that the diamonds who caused the corruption are the same diamonds performing the cure, and that this is not redemption, but it is repair. And repair is what was needed. Even this, in the end, is a fusion argument. The healing requires all 4 diamond powers working in concert. It requires Ruby and Sapphire to be Garnet and Garnet to be Garnet and Steven to be Steven, and it requires Yellow and Blue and White to stop being what they have been for millennia and start being something else. The largest healing in the show's history is performed by a combination of powers that had to learn to stop working against each other. It is fusion, on a diamond scale. And it saves everyone. That is perhaps the final statement the show makes about what the most powerful fusions are for. Closing thoughts on a long night. You have now heard everything this ranking has to offer. Every fusion, every power assessment, every note on stability and relationship, and what the weapons reveal about the people who wield them. It is late wherever you are, or early, or some quiet hour that does not fit neatly into either category. Here is what I want to leave you with before you go to sleep. This show was made by people who cared about it with an intensity that comes through in every frame. Rebecca Sugar wrote the songs and designed the emotional architecture and created a world that has enough room in it to contain two beings in a cave in the rain, discovering that they are something the universe has not seen before. She built that into the foundation of everything, into the literal foundation of the show. The Crystal Temple is shaped like obsidian. The most powerful fusion is the template for the building where the story lives. Every fusion in this ranking was built with that same care. The voice cast, the weapon design, the way the show thinks about what each component brings to their combination, the thematic argument each fusion is making about its specific relationship. None of it is accidental. All of it is the show saying, this matters. These relationships matter. What people become together matters more than what they can do alone. Obsidian is at the top of the ranking, but she is made of 5 beings who needed each other in order to become her, and each of those 5 beings needed the others too. The ranking is real and Obsidian wins it, and also the ranking is beside the point, and the point is them. All of them. Together. Take care of the people who make you into something you could not be alone. That is the ranking. That is the show. Good night. If you enjoyed this, a like means the world and a subscribe keeps us going. And in the comments, tell me your location and the time, and tell me which fusion is yours. The one that belongs to you. The one that made the show feel like it was talking to you specifically in that particular corner of the world, at that particular hour. I will read every single one. Good night.